Hello, in this video we are going to go over UVs. So UVs are a 2D representation of our model so that we can apply textures. And the first thing I like to do is when I'm starting my UVs is go to my workspace and change this to UV editing. This is a good layout for doing your UVs because you have your UV editor, your UV toolkit, and then a space to look at your model in the perspective. So let's create a polygon cube just to demonstrate what UVs are. So you'll see when you create this that this comes in with these white lines that usually aren't there. These are cuts, UV cuts on the model. They're not physical cuts, so if you selected this face and moved it, it wouldn't separate. These are only on the UV. So you can see here, you have this, and that's what these are corresponding to, the borders. So I'm going to click on here, and this is a checker map. And this gives you the ability to see if there's distortion or anything like that. It's mainly just used to check your work, that kind of thing. So I'm going to select, I can right click over it and say UV. I'm going to select this UV or this one. I'm going to move it. See how it's distorting the texture? And you can see that the space is different. This is demonstrating that you want to keep your UVs, generally you want to keep them uniform. So if you have a grid like this, they'll be squares. And that way when you apply any kind of material or texture on there, you won't have any skewing or distortion happening. Okay. And then you can take a look at this. See, that's the zeros in here. That's happening here. That's going here. And this is the default kind of layout of a cube. Okay, so I'm going to delete this and then we'll start our helmet. Okay, so when starting something, I usually like to start with the easiest object. And the easiest thing is a simple, probably this top piece. And I'm going to isolate it. And you'll see that this already has a bunch of these cuts in it. When you're modeling, this happens depending on how you model it. But what we can do is we are going to go to UV and say camera based. And this will make my UVs have no cuts in it, and it kind of puts it in, places my UVs like it is in my perspective camera. So now that I don't have any cuts, I can start cutting. The tool I like to use to do that is if I go to UV and 3D cut and sew tool, I can click on that. And I'm going to go over to the tool settings. And down here, if I go there, you'll see there's a bunch of hotkeys. This is a really hotkey intensive tool, but the things I mostly use is just I select the area that I want to cut and I double click. And you'll see that turned white, like a bolder white line. That means there's a cut there. If I make a mistake, you can look over here. Control, middle mouse, drag, left middle mouse, drag. Control, left middle mouse. Okay, so control, left middle mouse, drag. You got rid of those. There's a couple ways to undo your work. I'm just gonna undo this. There we go. So when you're trying to figure out your cuts, you want to pick the areas that are, most of the time you want to pick your cuts where there's a 90-degree angle. So like right here and right here. And you want to be thinking about, how do I cut this out in a way that when it unfolds or when it flattens out, I get the least amount of distortion. Can optimize my space on my UV space. We want to keep everything in this space here. So I'll show you as we go. So I'm cutting out all these corners. So that looks fine. Sometimes you can miss some, so I'm just double checking. Okay, so now I'm going to hit W to get out of the tool and go to UV shell. I usually like to pull them out, each one of the pieces, just to make sure I completely cut them out. So there we go. There we go. So now I'm going to go select all my UV shells, go to the UV toolkit, and go down to Unfold. And I'm going to click Unfold. You see how it flattened everything out? Okay. So I'm going to take all these and just kind of move them down. So now we have to figure out the scale. It doesn't uniformly scale everything. So just to demonstrate this, I'm going to click on my checker map here. And I am going to scale this piece up. You see that the squares are much smaller than this side. You want to keep things that are the same piece. Generally, you want to keep those to be the same scale. That's a good rule of thumb, or not guide of thumb, I guess. I don't know. So I'm going to click out of that and put this over here. You can click over here. I'm going to pick the piece that is the widest and scale it down, because I know that I want this piece to be in here probably together. I could cut it up, but let's see what we can do. Let's place it there. And so that's the scale I want everything to be. So I'm going to select that and then go to Transform, Get, and then select everything and say Set. And that fixed that. Now I can select all these pieces. I'm going to rotate them. So I want to make sure that my UVs, in general, especially for big pieces like this, you want them to be consistent in the world. So rotating them so like this isn't upside down isn't great. You want to make sure it kind of is readable, so you know what they're doing, and they're kind of like in world direction if you can. Sometimes it's more important to fit as much as you can in your texture space, so you can get away with like rotating things that don't make sense, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to move this over here. And then this piece over here. I'm going to put this right here. So in UVing, there is a balancing act of, do I care more that I have a seam here where there's an edge that's cut, or do I care more that I'm not I care more about the optimization of my texture resolution. So if I want more texture on these pieces, I would need to cut this piece in half. So I'm going to cut that. You can do a cut by just going down here. There's a cut and sew area, and say cut. Cut that. So now I can just move this down there, and then move these like down here and there, and I can select all of them and scale them up to see if I can fit everything in. So let's try that. You want to keep everything within this first grid. You don't want any of the pieces to overlap each other. If they're overlapping, that means the texture will you won't have a unique texture on that spot. So the textures will share in this spot if I put them overlapping. So there we go. Like this. Like that. So now I'm using my space a little bit better. Nothing's overlapping. It looks okay. And I'm just going to double check to make sure the squares are all good. There's no distortion happening. And everything looks fine. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video.